Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 130 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley, and today's episode is on police psychology and police culture, and it is Saturday the 22nd of January 2022 as I record this. So this is an absolutely brilliant podcast episode that I really enjoyed, because police psychology is one of those smaller areas of forensic psychology that doesn't always get looked at, but it's an amazing, really interesting, really engaging, and to be honest, quite fascinating area of psychology, because over the past year, at least in the UK, in the US and in other parts of the world, we've been seeing lots of really negative police reports about the police. For example, shootings, problems with police culture. And even though that is not the focus of police psychology specifically, we can use this area of forensic psychology to help examine why this is the case. So this is a great episode that I cannot recommend enough, so definitely listen to it. So, moving on to the psychology news section. So we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, coffee can't fix all cognitive impairments caused by a bad night's sleep. Many of us treat a bad night's sleep with a couple of cups of coffee the next morning, but just how much caffeine really helps? Research shows that it makes a big difference to tasks that require vigilance, attention, or continuous monitoring. One theory even holds that the cognitive deficiencies caused by sleep deprivation are underpinned by impairments in attention, and this implies that caffeine could be a great cure for sleep deprivation illnesses. However, a new study in Journal of Experimental Psychology, Learning, Memory and Cognition suggests that this is not the case. Caffeine indeed restores vigilance attention to regular levels in sleep-deprived participants, but it has barely any impact on another type of performance that is important for all kinds of jobs. So, in all honesty, this is not a great surprise, because we all heard of examples, and I'm sure that some people have even experienced this, but that the problem with having cups of coffee is that it doesn't always help though, and I think having coffee when you're tired has just become a part of pop culture, and it's actually just become one of those myths where everyone believes, even though it doesn't actually hold true though. But as I always say though, it is good to have the research side. But one of the most important takeaways from this psychology news update is make sure that you get enough sleep, and that's really important. So the second one is, can memes help people cope with pandemic-induced anxiety? The COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on our collective mental health, from its effect on the experience of a postnatal depression amongst new mothers to the ongoing impact of post-COVID brain fog. Researchers also looked at what might remedy some of these negative effects, engaging in meaningful activities, for example, or making changes in our lives to feel more in control. Amir Akram and colleagues explore another potential technique in their paper in Scientific Reports looking at memes. They find that pandemic-related memes could provide one coping mechanism for people experiencing anxiety, with anxious people more likely to find them funny, relatable, and shareable. So I think it's just really surprising because memes. So memes have always these funny things though, but I never thought that they could actually have an impact on mental health, and they could actually help us, because memes. I can't remember the last time I actually engaged with one, because of course we would just see it, maybe laugh at it, read it, and then we just move on with our day there. But this is why it's actually quite interesting to take these everyday things that we experience and to see what sort of effect do they have on us. And I don't really know how memes could be used in a therapeutic sense or an official sense, but it'd be interesting to see in the future. Okay, and the last one is, conflicting health information can compromise our attention. We get our information about health from many sources. Sometimes we seek advice from doctors or other medical professionals. Sometimes we talk to friends or family. We read newspapers and watch TV, and we diagnose ourselves with rare and alarming afflictions with the help of the internet. Yeah, just don't do that. I've never seen the point in it, and it just makes you panic that you've got this really bad thing when you actually haven't. So in some ways, This variety offers a democratization of the knowledge, a way for more of us to understand what's going on with our health, but what's happening when this information contradicts itself. This is the subject of a new study from a team at Roxburgh University, published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine. The reason why I wanted to actually mention this article is just that yes, the pandemic is going on, but just make sure that whenever you do get information, it's from a reliable source. That from example, like some sources on the internet are great. For example, in the UK, we have like NHS and even some of the news agencies that can actually provide some quite good information. But then there's also the darker side of the internet. For example, today a new study came out that over 2/3 of the anti-vaccine propaganda is being created by just 12 individuals, which is just like crazy. All in all, like, make sure that you get your information from a reliable source. So that's enough psychology news section. Let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week I'm back into my university placement. So I've been doing quite a bit of that. Week as I've been going through with some improvements, some comments, and just developing my normal academic skills, and just making sure that everything is even better and that things go even deeper. And I know that a number of university students actually listen to the podcast, so I really do feel everyone's pain when it comes to academic writing, because it's so I don't want to say tedious, but there's so many little bits to it. There's so many little improvements, and it does sort of seem like a never-ending cycle. But this is the great thing about learning, is that yes, it might never end, but this is still really useful though, because all of these stuff that I'm learning now, in all of these improvements, will definitely help me next year when it comes to my final year. So the placement can't continue. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley, and you can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. I always love to hear from you, because it really does help make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Police Psychology, the forensic psychology guide to police behaviour. So as I sort of hinted at in the last section, I love police psychology. It was such a great area to research. It was so great to sort of connect stuff to the different news reports about police behaviour, but also police culture, which is why I'm actually focusing on it today, because yes, there are quite a few chapters on police culture, because basically if you've been in the UK, then over the past few months, then you would have heard a lot about police culture and how it needs to change. But it's a great, really easy to understand book that actually goes into a lot of great, fascinating depth. Actually, really helps you to understand it. What is a police culture? Why does it need to change? Why is it so bad as it is? But then also, what's some of the problems with the idea of a cop culture? And then it goes on to tons of other great areas. For example, the witnesses interviewing, forensic hypnosis. Yes, and also lethal force. But there are so many great other areas though, so I can't recommend this great, really easy to understand book enough. So that is Police Psychology, the forensic psychology guide to police behaviour, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback copy from Amazon, your local bookstore, or local library if you request it. So let's move on to the really amazing content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about police psychology and police culture. And as I mentioned before, police psychology is a fascinating area of forensic psychology that examines police behaviour and why the police act as they do, because it can be used to explain a lot of behaviours that have featured a lot in the news recently. For example, some police officers have extremely damning attitudes towards women, homosexuals and other minority groups, as well as most of these attitudes are from their police culture, hence the focus of it in today's episode. So now I'm going to read you an extract from my police psychology book. Moving on to our first proper topic of the book, we need to look at the idea of police culture, because it has dramatic effects on the police and how they operate, as you'll see in the upcoming chapters. However, to get us started, the idea of there being a personality or set traits that make a good police officer is dubious. Because if this personality exists at all, this is more likely down to the requirements of police work rather than a set of already existing traits. Ball, 1984. Personally, I'm not even sure I know what these traits would be. Maybe some are hardworking, caring, relatable, good at problem solving, amongst others. But if you're interested in this personality idea, you should read Personality Psychology and Individual Differences, because it shows what personality traits actually are, as I think in this case, personality traits might be being used as a buzzword and not what they actually mean. Furthermore, Answorth 1995 suggested 2 days in police work are never the same, because the officers will have numerous suspects, new cases, reports, evidence, and more each day. Different crimes will be committed, and so on, leading to the training of the police officers are a compromise between what is practical in a training and what would be ideal, with the earlier generations of police officers only getting on the job training, which, let's face it, isn't ideal, because these young officers could easily learn bad habits from senior officers. As well as Answorth 1995 discussed that past training focused on available powers for police and encouraged route training of legislation. Now there's a growing emphasis on extensive training, hence police academies, at least in the US. Also, the training is increasingly concerned with how to deal with the wide variety of incidences that the police may occur, which is a good idea, I think, because when something happens to an officer, they need to know how to react, be it a bank robbery, chasing a suspect, being assaulted, etc. Officers need to know how to react, and it's that training about how to react that might be able to stop some of these really negative news reports from keep happening. How does training affect officers? Now, this is a good one. One of the reasons why I do with psychology and explore it as much as I can is because every so often you will find a very strange fact or something that surprises you about behaviour, and I really do believe this is one such thing, since the process of becoming a police officer leads us to changes without the officers knowing, which I smile at, because I find it amazing how we can change as a people and to not know that's how we've changed. Sure, I know the same applies to me, but I think it's such a strange quirk of a behaviour. So to test this, Gardner 2005 conducted a study looking at pro-police positions and attitudes with police trainees through training and a year later. The results found drastic pro-police positions and attitudes changes on the trainees, but the officers believed strongly that they hadn't changed at all. Again, I think this is great, because we know that they've changed, but the person believes that they haven't changed in the slightest. Culture. Diving into the police culture part of the chapter, part of the training officers received is on-the-job training with senior officers, which, as I mentioned earlier, can be regarded as a practical training, and some senior officers may use practice that are less than ideal, leading trainees to learn bad habits. I've mentioned this because it's important to consider when we think about the occupational subculture or police culture. In addition, Sluknik 1996 was the first to suggest that the culture of police officers influenced the work of the police force, and this culture is unique to the police. For example, the workplace culture in a hospital is going to be different to the one in a school. Furthermore, the police culture refers to the characteristic patterns of thinking, beliefs, behaviour, and interactions that police officers share. Essentially, these are normal, accepted, and prescribed standards for police personnel, but this doesn't mean that they're fixed or unchanging patterns. Linking this to the beginning of the chapter, officers may be picked because they have the qualities that a good officer has, but they learn and become indoctrinated into the police culture by interacting with other officers. And I'm not trying to make the police sound evil and like they're brainwashing their officers, because all coaches do this. On a societal level, this is known as enculturation and socialization. On a workplace level, this is how we learn the norms and what's accepted in our place of our work, for example, the professionalism required in a major company. But on an individual level, this is how we learn our family culture and what's accepted in the home, family, and social groups. Nonetheless, this can be problematic, as it can be at odds with what officers are taught at a police college, so it can cause some problems for the officers as they adjust to the reality of police work. This feeds strongly into the next few chapters. Also, it is the exact same for clinical and forensic psychology, because we're taught the best way to treat offenders and reduce re-offending in rehabilitation. And yes, it does work, and we do need to invest more in it, and you can read forensic psychology for proof. But when we get into the real world and we learn about politics and budgets, we learn how little rehabilitation is actually focused on, at least in forensic psychology. So that does lead to some annoying readjustments and learning of what reality is like. Overall, the police force as an organisation exists in two parallels, was the structural aspect deals with what should happen and is the formal, whereas the cultural aspect deals with what actually goes on in the organisation. So we've spoken about police culture, but what's cope culture and how does sexuality affect police officers? So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and I hope that you got something out of it. Police psychology, it's so critical. I really do love the topic. It's great and I cannot recommend Police Psychology, the Forensic Psychology Guide to Police Behaviour enough. It's a great fascinating book that I cannot recommend enough. And it's available in all of the usual places. So if you know someone who would find today's episode useful, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. So have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day and I'll see you next time.